Hey everybody, my name is Warren Wright. I am CEO of Second Wave Learning and the author of the new book, Second Wave Millennials, Tapping the Potential of America's Youth. I hope you stick around for the show. We're going to be talking about everything you don't know about Second Wave Millennials. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing that can change everything. Let me ask you, how do you need to level up in your business? Well, today we're going to be taking an insider look at generations and our biases across those generations. Boomers, Gen Xers, Millennials, and a new group you may be unfamiliar with who are changing just about everything. They are the second wave Millennials. Stay tuned. You are about to be riveted. Remember, you can now chat about this episode or any past episodes of our show inside of our Facebook group, Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips, or Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. I apologize. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. And remember, you can now find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We need your help in staying relevant. So please get over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. When you do, go on the Facebook page. Tell us about it. Maybe we'll give you a shout out on a live show. Remember, you can catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Lancaster, Philadelphia to Colorado Springs. You can also find us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, you can also catch us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron Podcast. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's dive right in and let's strip it down. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that generational challenges abound in parenting, teaching, in managing, in leadership. They're everywhere. And all too often, working with boomers and Gen X leaders, I hear them talk about millennials in less than a complimentary terms. They say things like they have no work ethic, they're not loyal, they're entitled, they're spoiled little brats who want to be entertained and have no respect for those who have paid their dues. In fact, one famous quote about the younger generation is this: the youth of today love luxury. They show disrespect for elders, love to chatter rather than exercise, and children are often tyrants, and they contradict their parents and tyrannize their teachers. Just so you know, that quote is from Socrates. So this looking down on the new generation, it ain't new. So how can we as leaders find a way to put aside our generalized and generational bias and get the best out of ourselves and tap into the potential of a younger generation? Well, stay tuned, because our guest today is Mr. Warren Wright. He is a leading authority on generations and the author of Second Wave Millennials, Tapping into the Potential of America's Youth. He is a founder and CEO of Second Wave Learning, whose mission is to prepare the next generation of leaders for tomorrow's challenges. Fascinating. Warren Wright is a guy with possibly the most impressive resume I have ever come across. And it is wide, and it is deep, and it is fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and help me welcome Mr. Warren Wright. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Doug. That's a wonderful one. You have the best introduction ever of all time.
So good to have you here, mate. You know, you and I chatted off air, and I was fascinated by certainly, as I said, by your resume and your background, but your research and what you've dug into, and there's so much here for us to talk about that I'm actually concerned that we'll actually run out of time when most people are like, oh God, an hour. This is going to be fascinating. So let's start right at the beginning, which is with the title of the book, Second Wave Millennials. Please tell our listeners of yours, what does that mean? Because most people have heard of millennials, but they've not heard of second wave millennials.
Yeah, so the concept is that every generation, which is about the length of a phase of life, about 20 to 25 years, right? So, and the reason is because that's when people have children, right? In the 20s. And of course, these days, it looks like generations are actually getting longer, not shorter, with people having kids later in life. So every generation has two waves, a first wave and a second wave. The first wave are the older ones, and the second wave are the younger ones. So when you think about the baby boomers, the first wave were the folks that were coming along, and they were born maybe in the mid 40s, all the way up to maybe, from 1943, maybe to the early 50s. And then the second wave was early to mid 50s to 1960 or somewhere in that range.
Right.
So what differentiates those two, in addition just to the years, is they're both raised by different generations. So the older boomers were raised by the GI generation, and the younger boomers were raised by the silent generation. And the generation that reared you does have an impact in the way you see the world and how your worldview is, obviously, of course, right? So this is a distinction that is typically overlooked among folks that follow the generations. I think what's happening now is there's a big effort to just label everything that comes along every year, and I think the media they'll have a panic attack if they can't think of another name for another generation that's coming up next, and they're trying to shorten the time periods and so forth like that. So by my definition, which is kind of the standard definition of generations, millennials are born between 1982 and 2004. That's a 22-year period. It's a long period of time.
Yep.
It's true that a 14-year-old is not the same as a 37-year-old. Yeah, I get that, right? But from the standpoint of the waves, we're looking at the first wave. These are the ones. This is the Pete Buttigieg and Andrea Ocasio-Cortez, and these really hard-charging mid-30-year-olds that are entering into politics right now that are very visible. These are the first wavers.
Right.
They've been really raised by their parents to be very high achieving, very competitive. They're on top of things. They're moving. They will not slow down. They're using technology to their advantage. They have all these kind of benefits going through them, and they're really likely to reshape economics, politics, society in many ways. It's typically a very powerful first wave of this generation. And then second wavers are the younger folks. They're the folks that are going to be between the ages of maybe 15 and 23. Some people call them Gen Z, which is a word that doesn't make any sense, because what does that mean?
What's next also?
Well, double A, like a battery. I mean,
double A.
How do you the whole letter thing is kind of silly. The reason that was Z is because X was X. I'm an Xer, but that was a reason. X meant no brand. That meant like nothing. Like, we are not a brand. Do not brand us, right? And then Y didn't really stick. Some millennials stuck, but Y didn't stick because Y didn't mean anything. Anyway, so that's that. So that's the distinction. And I think the reason I wrote the book is because people don't know what to do with these second waivers. They're really different than the first waivers.
So the first waivers, just so everybody grasps for a minute. So the first waivers are Cortez, who's in politics now. They're a little bit older. They are very active. They're out in the workforce. They're out in politics. They're they're rising in whatever form of philosophy they might have. There's also a lot of very young right-wingers who are, when I say very young, they're also that same age bracket. But there's this younger bracket who are somehow between those first level of millennials and what we might call Gen Zs or Gen Zs, which are now, as you say, they might be even as old as 23. How are they different than the ones who are 33, for instance? There's a 10-year gap. How are they different? I mean, you said they're brought up by different parents, but how are they different philosophically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, first of all, I will say that they all are millennials. And so they are, the 7 characteristics, millennials, special. They were raised to feel special by their parents, both young and old. So first wave, second wave, they've been sheltered and protected all their lives and kind of, in close proximity, really. Probably more Gen X parents have been more involved in the hands-on than boomer parents. I call the Gen X parents the lawnmower parents. They literally mow over everything that's in the way of their child. Whereas the boomers are helicopters, right? So because of that, there's characteristics that are different, right?
Sure.
So I'll give you an example. I mean, you look at what happened in Parkland, right? And we just had the anniversary for the Parkland shootings, and those kids, those teenagers are second waivers. Okay, so David Hogue and all those folks that are doing that stuff, right? So believe it or not, it is it's an activist generation, but it's a little bit different. The reason that the second waivers are so interested in being involved in gun violence is that this is a generation that is actually, believe it or not, very conventional, and they want to follow rules. They want there to be rules, right? Lack of rules is what's got us into trouble. They want to bring back rules. So interestingly, I mean, youth are supposed to break rules, right? Isn't that what youth are supposed to do? That's what boomers did, right? And to some extent, with the AOC and that whole movement, there's a lot of breaking going on of rules. Like we're going to tear that sucker down, and we're going to start over again, right? I think that we're seeing in these second waivers, I can't use the word conservative, but I can use the word conventionality. They're like good kids, don't do drugs. They're not having sex, by the way, at all. I mean, it's like kind of an issue. They're not drinking, they're not smoking, they're not having sex. They're actually growing up much slower than their older counterparts. They're making decisions about marriage, and they do have more student debt and so forth, an average of $30,000. So that's an issue. But there is kind of a more. They want to be really good citizens. It's like really important to them that they are really good citizens, and they're real serious too. And I don't know if you spend time with 16, 17, 18-year-olds. I've never seen teenagers this serious. Teenagers are kind of goofy by nature.
Yeah, kind of goofy. Yeah. So it's interesting because
in my focus group, and they're just looking down. I mean, they're just like, they're really, they're stressed out too.
That's what I was just about to say. That they seem to be more stressed, and the general consensus on that is the weight of crushing debt and the potential of crushing debt. Both, it's one of my arguments about the people talk about the U.S. economy is booming. I go, how can it be booming when it's multi-trillion dollars in debt? I'm old enough to remember when it hit the first trillion and people were like freaking out. Now it's multiple trillions, and you talk about an economy that's booming. That kind of economics doesn't make any sense to me. That's like saying, well, I'm wealthy. Why? Well, I just got a $5 million loan and I only owe $6 million. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Not. Right. So, this generation do seem to be very different. They do seem to be driven by different things. But, you said something there that there's been, in many ways, every generation has been, we look at millennials, and it's one of my arguments I've said all the time is, we look at them and we judge them, but we forget that we were them. Like I've always said, millennials are baby boomers with balls. We were never going to work for the men, and we became the men. The difference is they have the internet, and they said, screw you, and if I don't like the job, I'm going somewhere else. And I actually love that about millennials. But I think that the ones that millennials I'm talking about are actually what you would call first wave millennials versus these second wave millennials, which is fascinating because what's made them so different? What do you think has made them so different, Warren, from those first wave? What is the distinction? That's what I'm fascinated by.
Well, so I think people underestimate this notion of what I call social mood in America, and I think social mood is an overall kind of undefinable culture of what is going on and how people are feeling. And there's one second waver who's 15. Her name is Greta Thunberg, and she's a Swedish teenage climate activist. And she went in front of the UN basically just ripped them a new one, right? I mean, she was amazing. But I think what she's reacting to is kind of an existential fear of the future and I think it's bizarre because I think older people, and I'm not advocating climate change. I'm not here to advocate climate change, no climate change, whatever. I'm just making an observation that this is a generation that is thinking way out in the future. And I think part of that is and
psychologically that doesn't make sense.
No, it totally doesn't. No.
Right. Like psychologically in developmental stages, you don't start thinking about the future in that way until you're around 30, and in a much bigger way after your own death once you reach 45. So to be thinking about that kind of future when you're 15 years old is kind of like, at 15, I was thinking about which soccer match I was going to and whether I was ever going to lose my virginity.
Wow, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So you literally have the girls or the guy, whoever it is you're interested in is on your mind like all the time. And
that's it.
What do I do tomorrow?
Yeah. What do I do tomorrow to get her attention or his attention? Which is very different than, the fucking icebergs are melting, and what can I do about it?
So here's a data point that helps explain that. Pew came out with a really interesting study, and it evaluated if people have the ability to distinguish between opinions and facts.
Yes.
So what they had was they had 5 opinions and 5 facts, and they would say a statement, and they say, is this opinion and fact? So I'll give you an example. One of the statements was, immigrants are bad, right? Is that a fact or an opinion? Well, we know that's an opinion, not a fact. I mean, you can argue and say, okay, they're bad at some things, but they're creating, whatever, filling jobs and so forth. So that's an opinion, not a fact. Here's what's fascinating. Younger people are on a 2-to-1 ratio are more likely to be able to distinguish fact from opinion than older folks. So part of this is the younger people seeing stuff for what it is. They don't get BS'd very easily. Like they actually are really smart, and they're doing the research, and they know how to search Google in a way that differentiates the BS from the real stuff. We don't know how to do that. No. And so we're caught up in this, kind of crazy believing anything thing, right? And they're actually have a more rational distinction around that. So just literally knowledge of what is and what is going on. And the fact is there is a lot to worry about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can say what we want, but there's all kinds of stuff going on. We have rising fascism, frankly, around the world, and that's a real issue. And so they're seeing all this stuff, and what they're seeing is a little bit of disorder and a little bit of chaos, and they're picking up on it. They're picking up on their parents' anxiety. They're transferring it to their own anxiety. They have social media, which actually increases their anxiety because they have to be fear of missing out, right?
Sure.
So all these things are coming together to create a very serious, a sober generation, which again is people we haven't seen that in a very long time, if ever, I think.
And again, as you said, we're entering a very different time, and I don't know that any generation wouldn't have said that when they were 45, 55 years old, saying, "Oh, we're the next generation." But there does seem to be some fascinating changes as a student of history, as a student of politics and psychology myself. I really do believe if you don't pay attention to history, you're destined to repeat it. Because that's evident. But I want to push into something here because I think it's going to allow us to have some context. One fascinating area that you studied and later became deeply ingrained in was the work of Strauss and Howe, who documented certain patterns and some might say predictions in a book that you and I were talking about called The Fourth Turning. That was about 20 years ago. And according to those guys, we entered into a crisis period of about 20 years that they said would roughly take place between 2005 and 2025. And in 2011, you became partners, and you with Neil Howe, who's the guy who coined the phrase millennials. First of all, tell us how that came about and why that came about. Why you became, because these guys did some, I mean, we can certainly go into them, but some of the profound predictions that we're seeing today, like a president, I mean, like when I say today, as we record this, literally less than a week ago, they predicted that a president would use a state of emergency for political gain.
They did.
I mean, these guys Nostradamus or what,
So I will say that, I'm a student of data and data points in history and society and sociology. And, working at Gallup was like a kid in a candy store. We would ask, thousands of questions all over the world about almost everything in terms of people's behavior and how it impacts economics and psychology and all those elements. And so I was a person who thought he knew everything about this stuff, or at least had an idea of where to go to find the stuff that could explain the way we live our lives. And that changed forever in one lunch that I had several years ago. And it was a mutual friend of Neil and mine from Texas had recommended we get together, and he was bugging both of us for like a year. And we finally just had lunch. So Neil starts telling me about generations, and I just, a 1 hour lunch turned into a 3 hour lunch. I had a recognition that there was something there that people just don't talk about, they don't know about, they don't have a perspective on, yet it has a remarkable impact on the way we live our lives, products we decide to buy, how the macro economy moves forward or goes backwards. And so I just had an absolute fascination with this stuff. So there's a book called The Fourth Turning, which you mentioned, and that came out in 2007. It's not an easy read. It's for smart people, people who could really weave together ideas and thoughts. Yeah, not hardly for me, right? I needed the the easy edition, right? But it's fascinating because what it does is it looks back literally to the mid 1400s in Anglo history and looks at these odd repeating patterns that happen every 80 to 90 years pretty consistently. And the reason I think, and Neil talks about this, and people don't pay as much attention to this, is that the generation that is most likely to remember what has happened is the generation that's just dying off. So the GI generation, who could teach us a lesson right now.
Yes.
So the GI generation could tell us about Hitler. He could tell us about they could tell us about the rise of fascism. They could tell us about the increase in border security that was going on in the late 30s, right? And all of these conditions, they could tell us about that. They're dying. I mean, literally, they're 98 years old right now. There's hardly any GI generations, right? So an entire generation's worth of knowledge has moved away, and we're starting fresh again, like we always think we are, right? But really, what we're doing is we tend to be repeating a lot of the same behaviors and patterns right now. So the notion is that there are four turnings in what's called a saeculum, which is Latin for a lifetime, and each of those turnings, the first one is a high, what's called a high, and the most recent high was it was post World War II, right? It was after World War II. It was between I think the GDP tripled, or actually quadrupled, between the end of World War II and the beginning of the 70s.
Yeah, it was really, in many ways, the birth of the middle class.
Totally.
America,
There was
right?
no middle class. There was, and by the way, there was no suburbs. There was rural and city.
That's
There
it.
wasn't any suburbs,
Right.
right?
So it was the birth of the middle class which gave birth to the suburbs and all that way of being
It
that
was
just didn't even exist until then.
it was the last generation really to have a focus on the middle and not the extremes. And we've been moving, if you look at the Gini indexes and so forth, which is the disparity between incomes at the highest and the lowest, it's been going up and up and up, and for the past 30 or even 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the last generation. Now in millennials, we're seeing patterns of thought and expression that are consistent with the GI generation. They want to actually create more of a middle class. It's the first generation to just come out and just say it. Look at Bernie Sanders. How come an old guy who's in his 70s is popular with millennials, right? It's not because of his age.
No, that's the fascinating thing. And I just want to pause that for a moment because I want people to grasp that, because this is where in our conversation, this is where I thought this is what is going to allow people to come together and grasp this. Because how is AOC, how is she so popular? I mean, she's saying what Bernie said in many ways, but Bernie Sanders was very popular with young people in the last election. I believe they stole the position from him, and I actually think he would have been a really good contender for Trump because of the youth behind him. But why, when everything in politics has always said you got to find somebody that the people can relate to, why is young people related to Bernie Sanders? And that was when we had our conversation. I went, I'm getting this second wave thing now in a way I'd never understood it, because it's values based. Right. And I talked a lot about how millennials are all looking for meaning in their lives and they want meaningful work. And our work is about finding purpose-driven leaders and building purpose-driven organizations, but it's meaning. And so when Sanders steps up and talks about the values and that kind of thing, it scares the crap out of Gen Xers. It scares the crap out of baby boomers, because they think of it as being socialism in the form of which they hold socialism, which has got nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it at all, but it's their own anxiety. And the young people are really beginning to, so that's the connection for me when you say they're not like the youth before. They are more serious. They are more committed. They are seeing different ways of values. That for me was a very important piece that I think people have got to put together. Yeah,
so Bernie Sanders calls himself a socialist, basically, and so to me and you and anybody that's over maybe 35 or 40, we remember communism, we remember socialism, we remember the Red Scare, we remember all that. I remember Reagan, mistakenly saying, "Let's bomb the hell out of them," whatever the hell he'd said, in 1983, right? And so again, they have no memory of that. To them, socialism is Denmark, maybe France, which has its issues, but at least people have healthcare, right? And so it's not Venezuela. It's actually working socialism to the youth, right? They see that actually happen.
Well, during Obama, I kept hearing, hardline Republicans saying Obama's a socialist. I'm like, how old are you?
Right.
If you don't know what a socialist is, I'm really concerned that you're putting Obama in that category, because, whether you're an Obama fan or not, and I was very happy when he was voted in, but he was still in the pocket of the corporations and a long freaking way from socialism.
Long way, very, very long way.
Fear tactics have always worked, and we know that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that with back to Bernie and the millennials, though, I think that another reason that the millennials are attracted to him is, so when you listen to his positions, they're exactly the same as they were 10 years ago. They're the same as they were 20 years ago. They're the same.
Very consistent.
And I think millennials have a real need to grab hold of a candidate who is, and this word is overused, but authentic. And everybody knows the millennials are attracted to authenticity, and everybody wonders what that means. So what it means is it's consistency in philosophy and thought. It is saying what's on your mind. It's being you, and it's being mistakes and being okay with that. It's not a puffed up chest persona of that's a movie star, so he looks great, so he looks like a president should look, so let's vote for him, as in Ronald Reagan. But it's not that they wouldn't be behind Ronald Reagan, but that wouldn't be a reason. You know what I mean? Like they're into the basic philosophy of that. And I will tell you that I can't remember if we mentioned this, but Neil and I had an opportunity to present to the leadership of the Republican Party in 2015 at their annual retreat in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So literally every member of the Republican, Mitch McConnell was there. I sat across from John Boehner. He was the Speaker of the House at that time. And so our charge was to, they gave us an enormous research project that we had about a year to work on. And our charge was to figure out who the millennials are and how the GOP could connect with them, basically.
Right.
So there's two big takeaways that we, just to fast forward on this. Number one is that millennials will represent 39% of the electorate by 2024. 39% of the electorate. Okay, it'll be the largest right? And so, and by the way, they will stay at 39% for the next 26, 27, 28 years. So whatever's going to happen, they're going to basically control and run everything.
Yeah,
right?
They're going to control politics.
The second thing the point that we made was that according to Columbia University and a number of other studies, people's political identification does not change that much between the time they're in their mid-20s and the time they're in their 40s or 50s or 60s. It does a little bit. John Boehner said to me, we gave him this whole thing, and he's like, I'm not really worried. I say, why aren't you worried? He goes, well, people get more conservative as they get older. And I said, actually, the data does not show that. It looks like they will a little bit, and they'll get more conventional. And they will want houses, and they will want to get married, and they will want to have kids. But that's different than, so do the boomers, who are more liberal than the Xers. So that's not really, that doesn't really cut it. So you have the combination of a 30-year reign of deciding who's going to be in the office, plus about a 70+% orientation towards progressive policy, and you basically have, Roosevelt in 3 terms and about 30 years worth of progressive policy, and so that's coming, and we're going to see that happening. And it might, and 2020 is probably too early, but by 2024, there's going to be a pretty serious shift in our country.
You presented to the Republican Party that there is a 30-year blue wave coming. And I find that very interesting when we look at today's politics, because the Republican Party isn't even the Republican Party anymore. It's certainly more authoritarian, and we've talked about, you and I talked about the rise of authoritarian leadership around the world. We're seeing it, in South America. We're seeing it,
Hungary.
In Greek politics. We're seeing it in Hungary. We're seeing it. They almost got it in France. We're definitely seeing it with Corbyn in Britain. It's what's called the whole Brexit bullshit. All this stuff doesn't look like a blue wave. It looks very much like a hard right wave. So help us understand that, Warren, because it seems so counterintuitive to all the signs that are there right now.
Yeah. So the reason the fourth turning was right about the fact that rise of authoritarianism would happen now. It's, believe it or not, actually because of baby boomers, which is amazing, shocking, and surprising, right? This peace, love, and understanding generation is also a generation of that is not pragmatically driven, but values driven. And so you have the left, you have the right, you have red, you have blue, you have non-compromise, this kind of digging into the core kind of thing, right? That happens. And this is the conditions by which, and what's happened is, it's interesting. I was talking to Neil about this, and he was basically saying the left is pushing the right more right, and the right is pushing the left more left. Showing up in the center, as they said, the famous congressman, is nothing but armadillos and two yellow lines in the middle of the road, right? So
Mhm.
and everything's just kind of going like this. At the moment, we are living. I mean, I will say that despite all this movement towards authoritarianism, Donald Trump did not get a majority of the. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, he didn't get as many votes as Hillary did, right? But it was popular enough to put him in office. I think that the staying power of the authoritarian is probably good for another maybe 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it is, 2024, 2028, right? This is towards the end of the fourth turning when a crisis is likely to happen, is when this kind of all culminates, right? All our major wars were 80 years apart, right? So Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War II, and whatever happens in 2 years, right? Which would be 80 years.
Yeah, and I was going to just say, I want everybody to grasp that, because this is not Nostradamus. This is not conjecture. This is looking at the data, looking at history, and saying the major war comes in about 80 years. We are scheduled for a war. The massive debt load, there's a lot of things that point towards it. An authoritarian leader who, as they talked about in that book, who is using his powers for leverage of his own position. It's not unreasonable. And I talked about this years ago. I lived in Australia. I was born in the UK, lived in Australia, was living there, working there, and I was working with Oliver the Pommies. And Margaret Thatcher was the least popular prime minister in the history of Britain. Although she was actually the longest serving, she was the least popular. She was the Trump of the day. And when her popularity was at the lowest, England went to war in the Falkland Islands. I'm like, and like I said, I study psychology and study politics and study history. I'm like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is a perfect way, because it joins people together, right? And I had mates who were hairdressers in Australia going, I think I'm going to go back and put on a uniform. I'm like, what the are you on crack? Your hair's purple. You're into fashion clothing, and you're going to go back and fight in a war for a bunch of small islands that have got 3 sheep and a lighthouse on them. Are you mad? But that pull, we were all so freaking trained into false patriotism, and I see that so clearly. Like, how did Bush get a second term? Because of the war. How is Trump going to get a second term? It's very, like, for me, it's like, ooh, that really concerns me that people can't see that. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I do.
Am I smoking something very strong?
No, but the people that can see it can't convince the people that can't see it ever in a million years, though. I mean, it's not,
right.
I mean, we could sit here. I mean, but there's nothing I think that moves in the social mood and shifts it quicker than a catastrophic event.
Right.
A lot of people say that would be the election of Donald Trump. What I would say is it's whatever happens kind of next.
Yes.
So we will see. Yeah, we're going to see. And he might get. I'm not going to sit here and say he's not going to get elected, because I said that.
I personally predicted. Personally predicted he is going to get a second term. If they don't put him in jail before that second election, he is going to get elected, because you talked about facts versus opinions. Opinions are facts to his backers.
Yeah.
It's that simple. When he says we're already building the wall,
right? No,
you're not. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Truth is really irrelevant, but
exactly.
So I do think, so people that are excited about the 2020 and all the liberals that are excited, I'm not sure about that. I will say that 2024, 2028, there's likely to be a very significant large shift as you have these millennials. By the way, there's 100 million of them. It's the largest generation in U.S. history, bigger than the baby boomers. And
so in 2024, is that when, because that's what, where are we now? So it's 5 years away, right? So it's 5.
5 years, I guess. Yeah.
Right. So 5 years as we record.
Yeah, we're that close. We're that close to the millennials representing about 39% of the electorate, which would be the dominant electorate, the much less baby boomers. By the way, if you look at Fox News, I used to be in the radio and TV business, and I used to study, Nielsen and Arbitron ratings. If you look at the ratings of Fox News, it's 84% 55 plus.
Yes.
Right? No one under 30 watches it, right? Or 35 even.
No.
And these folks are slowly kind of moving out and becoming a smaller percent of the electorate. And so you have a very significant generational shift going on. And I think the second waivers are actually going to temper and pull back the progressiveness of the first waivers. So AOC is not as interesting to David Hogue as he is to someone that's her own age, right?
Right.
And so you'll have kind of a moderating force with the second waivers to be more like maybe like a John McCain-ish type of character or something.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I see this insane right wing of the Republican Party, but when lefties are showing up and saying, well, you need to ask your baby for permission before you change its diaper, I'm like, Jesus,
that's driving the right. Right, that's driving the right.
Exactly. You are feeding this right-wing loonies,
yep.
and they are feeding left-wing loonies.
Right. Right.
So, it's been interesting to me because, as I said, I grew up in Britain, and there was always a minimum. There was more than three parties, but there was three parties that were a part of the general election that sort of got, and I really wonder, and this is why I want to ask you this, I wonder if these second wave millennials, and maybe even potentially Gen Z or whatever they end up being called, whether they will create this third middle ground solid party where we do consider people that is somewhat libertarian, but not the libertarian that we've seen.
Yeah, for me, it's hard to believe there's going to be three parties in our republic. There hasn't been in the 1700s, so that'd be hard.
No.
My thought is more that they will change both the Republican and Democratic Party, and that they will change it so that, and I don't know if you remember, but when Ronald Reagan had an argument and disagreed with Tip O'Neill,
mm-hmm.
right? They would go out for a drink, and they'd make a deal, right? And I see the second waivers more likely, and they have more of the stuff to be able to reach across, and I think there's going to be plenty of conservative second waivers, but I don't think they're not going to be a Trump-esque. That's over for the next. Once we're through with this cycle, we're over with that for 80 years, right? I think you'll have more moderate Republicans, more moderate Democrats, just like you did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s. Even Bill Clinton, a lot of people considered him a conservative and his economic policy, and we're freaking out about that. But he was, pretty centrist guy.
Yes.
So I think there'll be I'm hoping, a moderating force as we move forward. So
I wonder, from your point of view, how do you see this impacting? Because we've talked a lot here around political leadership, but how do you see this impacting leadership in the context of corporate, industrial, leadership? Bezos seems to be a very different leader than many of the other leaders, and we've seen these different kinds of leaders. What do you see? I mean, Howard Schultz is, I know that there's a populist president, and I know that, because we work with companies, I talk about how you've got to, when I work with a leader, a CEO or a founder, you have got to get people to connect with you as the human being, because that's the populist piece that's important. How do you see this second wave impacting leadership in that context?
So I think if you want to think about how a generation will be as leaders, you look at who they look up to, and you look at who their heroes are. And right now, I'm thinking of Elon Musk, who's someone who's certainly not afraid to break the rules. But I don't think that's why necessarily they like him. I think it's because he recognizes that stuff needs to change, and he's a paradigm changer. So like, he thinks nothing of digging this massive hole under the earth to create this car that goes 700 miles an hour. Like, the average person just wouldn't think of that. I mean, no. And then you think, well, we're going to go to space, and I think there's something that is inherently almost Kennedy-esque in that second waivers will grasp. Kennedy said, we're going to the moon. And everybody's like,
we don't have the technology, but we're going to do it. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I mean, that's ridiculous, right? And so I think as the the fading pragmatists of the Xers being pragmatists, right, and kind of looking at what's possible with what you have. I think second waivers are willing to embrace possibilities and impossibilities, and actually dig in and they want to create a society that's better for everyone. I mean, they really are interested in how do we get back to the middle class. Now that may mean taxes, but it might not mean taxes. It might mean a different way by using private industry to actually spur growth and create a more strength middle class. So, I think the other thing about second waivers is, as we talked about, I think their attraction towards authenticity. I think you're going to find that there's going to be presidents, there's going to be leaders that have, I just think, I live in Virginia, right? So we have a governor basically that put blackface on. We have another governor, scandal, right? So my thinking is for millennials, they're more likely to say, you know what? Shit happens in the past. Everybody's flawed. Let's just put it on the table. Everybody's flawed, right? So instead of condemning every person who's done every single thing, right? Let's just see people as human. Let's allow them and give the space to forgive and to apologize, because that's an important part of the process, right? That we're not even talking about now. We're all, yes or no, you're in or you're out, you fire him or don't, and it's ridiculous. I mean, that's just,
of course it is.
You have to allow space for reconciliation. So I do think that they're, from an emotional intelligence standpoint, I think second waivers are actually a little more in tune with the human condition that way. And the recognition that, look, not everybody's perfect. We're all a little bit lopsided,
Yeah, it's interesting because again, on that far left side is this craziness around as if everybody had a time machine, and so we're persecuting people for shit they did in the 80s that was silly, and looking back, not a great thing to do, but when I did it in the 80s, I was the 80s,
right?
And I think Kevin Hart was not doing the Oscars because he made gay jokes 12 years ago. And they said, apologize. And he went, no. I mean, he did apologize, but it was like, what the hell is this? And I think when we're, when the left is restricting comedy, we have some serious freaking problems. So it's this. So this is the other thing for me that's really an issue that comes up is like, so at what point are we allowed to say that was my history? That's something I did, because I don't know anybody who's perfect. I sure as hell am not. And I did some shit, and I trained speakers. And I said, when I train speakers, I say, listen, put your parents, our parents told us, don't air your dirty laundry. And I'd say, put your dirty laundry up front. Say up front, I did blow in the 80s. Say it. Because if you say it, you own it. Nobody can take it from you. You own the power of that. And I feel like so many people are living in anxiety, of how they may have spoken to a woman, or how they may have been with a gay person, or how they may have been with a person of color in their history. And so do you see these second wave millennials as being a little bit more realistic and compassionate and understanding of that? Are they the first waivers?
You're the master of understanding vulnerability. I mean, I've learned from you about that actually in a lot of ways, and I've recognized and through Brene Brown, and now of course everybody's talking about it, right? Vulnerability. So when you are saying what you're saying, like I did this back then, what you're doing is you're taking your inside and saying this is me, and you're being vulnerable, right? Mm-hmm. I think that second wave millennials are better at working through what that actually means. So as opposed to now if you and by the way, raping someone is different than wearing blackface, I think. Okay, so
absolutely. I
mean, that's the other thing. We don't make any distinction. Everything's in or out, good or bad, right? So
and also a lusting look,
right?
Is been given a false equivalency to sexual molestation. Right. I get it. I get the feeling of it. I understand, because I came from a background of psychology. I understand the impact of that. but it's not the same. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. But here's the problem. I think that right now we're in a environment where it's very difficult for someone to wholeheartedly apologize and make amends and move forward, because society is not creating the space for that. And I think that second waivers they're a little more in tune with their emotional intelligence, and maybe a little bit better at saying, oh, you're human. You did something that was horrible, and I'm sure you would never do it again, but let's hear you talk about, how you realize how you might have hurt people, and how, like, just open it up and have that conversation. That's not a conversation that even adults are willing to have right now. You actually see more of that with like high school kids right now. These Parkland kids are unbelievable when you hear them talk. They just open up and just talk about their vulnerabilities and then there's people there that understand and accept those vulnerabilities. So
you and I could definitely go for a long time, and I'm loving this conversation, but we're already coming close to the end of our time. So I want to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, I want to ask you, do you, when you look at the second wave millennials, and I talked about, the research shows on millennials that they are meaning driven, they're looking for the meaning of their lives, they're looking for meaningful work. How important do you see it, or do you see it as important for people who are in power positions now, being baby boomers and Gen Xers, for them to be purpose driven in the context of these are your employees coming on? Or do you think it doesn't matter?
Well, it's a really interesting question, because I think that boomers by nature were raised with a kind of like a natural gene around purpose. I mean, for boomers, it was all, Coca-Cola, it's like, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. We are stardust, we are golden, we got to get back to the garden. It was all about making things better and a purpose.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I think there's an interesting dynamic. I think boomers and millennials in a lot of ways could connect with one another with regard to that. I think Xers actually have a much more pragmatic approach to life and leadership, that there's only so much time for visioning. We got to get some work done, and by the way, let's reduce cost. The CEO of, Microsoft let go, 12,000 people, like, the first week he was hired. He's an Xer, right? So I think, but I do think that to the extent that there is purpose and there is focus on purpose and a broader meaning from current leaders, of course millennials are going to be attracted to that. It's very much in their DNA and kind of who they are. And I think, but sometimes they don't know how to, right? So they have this notion of purpose, but so we are the ones that need to impart upon them and teach them how, right? Here's how we get there. I run into more millennials that get so irritated with me that I tell them, like, just find your purpose. And they're like, well, I'm not a boomer. I can't just sit there and wait for it to happen. I have to pay loans. I don't have, but a really smart millennial told me once, he said, here's the way we think about purpose. What I tell my fellow millennials is, after college, get a job, do what you really like to do, build a skill, and then get good at that skill, and then make a purpose out of that, right? So instead of like just visioning and letting it happen like a boomer would, the millennials have kind of this combination of a pragmatism and a purpose-driven way, I think, of getting there. And I'm hopeful. I mean, I'm actually, at the end of the day, it's a big.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Whatever they do is going to be important to us.
Because that's what I was going to ask you. If we sort of fast forward to you and I being old enough to be dead, and we're sort of pretending we're ethereal beings flipping around, are you hopeful for those generations that are coming after us, that based on this second wave millennials and the Gen Z or whatever they end up being called? Are you hopeful that they'll create a better world, or are we, is this going to become frickin' water world run by dictators? Which is,
it gets back to
the way it looks right now.
I know. This is the way, we're literally in a crisis period, according to Strauss and Howe, right? So we're here. And we're about to come to the end of it in the next 5 years or so. And I think that if history is any guide, I think millennials are the generation that's going to lead us, like the GI generation, into a greater sense of community. It's one of the things that millennials are really, really interested in, is not the self, but the community, and how do we actually give back. They volunteer at higher rates. They're more likely to buy food that actually helps, is sustainable, and so forth. So I mean, if you're into that stuff, and by the way, I mean, being into that stuff is not a bad thing, because it actually extends the life of human beings.
Of course.
It's not just about the newt frog in South America. It's about you and me, like, getting enough oxygen and having a good balance of carbon dioxide and all that stuff, right? So, but I do think that millennials are spending more time thinking about this kind of stuff and being involved in it. You know that Teach for America got 7 times more applications than Princeton University. AmeriCorps and Peace Corps are busting at the seams. Goldman Sachs can't find people to work for them and interns to work for them from Harvard, right? In my generation, you would go to Wall Street and make as much money as you could. That's what you did. That's not what millennials are doing. So I do think they're looking at the bigger picture, believe it or not, for a young generation. And I think that bodes well for us in the future.
And I love that you're not optimistic because that's the preferable choice. You actually are looking at this data, and you're looking at these cycles and these turns. And I think that's very important for us to look at, particularly those of our generation who are looking and going, it's all going to hell in a handbasket. So I really appreciate that. Tell us, as we come towards the end here, I want to know a couple of things. Tell us how if you objectively, and I realize this is a deep question, how do you think the way you were brought up, your childhood, has impacted the way you are today, for better or for worse?
Gosh, yeah. Well, I can't talk about my childhood without talking about my parents, obviously. And I think that it's one word I think about when I think of them, and that's just integrity. Doing what they say they're going to do, and living your life the way that is that gives back to the community. I've had a mother that was very involved in civil rights at a very in the 60s, and so the notion of community and bringing things together is just kind of an important thing for me personally. At the same time, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business guy. I've started businesses and sold businesses before, and I'm kind of a private industry guy. And I truly believe that the private industry can, a B Corp, whether it's a B Corp or a socially minded organization, that's a fundamental part of how we're going to move forward, I think. And without that, just forget about it. I'm not, I guess I'm just not Mr. Socialist on that. I believe in private industry, and it can be used for good. And it is, again, like we talked about, you and I talked about this before, which is this is a fascinating time because we're going to see the rise of non-democratic capitalism because China's GDP is taking off. So they are very capitalistic, but they're not democratic. So you've got that on one side, and then on the other, and so the American, which has dominated, of course, for a long time, the American economy is going to fall back and behind, and I believe you're going to see this integration of these socialist values into business with conscious capital and with B Corps and those kinds of things. And I think that calls for the businesses who are going to make it and survive and thrive to be socially conscious, to be purpose-driven, to be focused on a community and a lot of those millennial hard values. And I will sometimes work with a founder who's 70 years old. He's upper end of the baby boomers, and he's like, I just don't give a shit about these people. And I'm like, yeah, well, you're going to be dead. And, and the company will be either bought by somebody who does care, or the person who moves into succession will care. But that reality is going away. And I think it's still very hard for Americans to grasp
I know it's not hard. It's almost impossible for Americans to grasp that we're not number one. You've not been number one for a long time in all kinds of ways, but you're not going to be number one at all economically, which has been the leverage point, in a very short period of time. Russia is now producing more GMO foods for export than the US is. China has got a growing GDP. These are countries that we look at and go, ugh. Well, you know what? The wheel turns.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It is. It is turning. It is turning, and so, say what you want. We're living in really unusual times right now and interesting times.
Absolutely.
And one of the signature characteristics of a fourth turning is history speeds up. And I don't know about you, but it seems like a decade has gone by since Trump's been elected. There's so much that's going on in the world, right? Yeah. And we just have this accelerated kind of pace of things. And I'm hoping.
And I think in many ways that Donald, I don't hide that I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but when people ask me, is there anything good? And I say so much, and they go, really? How can you say that? He has reignited the women's movement alone. Day after he was elected, all the pink hats came out. Right. He reignited that. He's reignited the conversation around environment. A lot of people who were millennials were a bit passive about that. They're not going to be passive anymore. He's reignited that. He's also reignited the extremism on both sides. I'll give you that. But there's a lot of, one of the things you talked about, millennials have bullshit meters, right? And so, and I love that. You've got a bunch of people, of course, who only see his opinion as facts, and it doesn't matter. But there are a lot of people on the other side who are going, you know what? We really have to think about politics now. We actually can't just go with we have to be the they. And I think there are many good things about this, Yeah,
I think so too. I mean, just think about, how our government functions. Right now, so Donald Trump is making challenges as an executive in the executive branch that really gets to the fundamentals of what's the role of the legislature and the Supreme Court. And actually, it's a case study. And, we're going to look back on this and say, we know the limits now, or we can make changes, or we can tweak the changes that our founding fathers made according to what we learned from that. So I think we're in a huge learning curve right now. And we have to take advantage of the learning to make it better for the future.
So I want to finish up with two quick things. Number one, what's your guilty pleasure, Warren?
Oh, well, my wife would tell you that I actually make my own hot sauce. So I grow peppers, I process them, and it would be fine, except my wife literally has to leave town because the house I don't know if you've ever processed peppers, but you get it in your eyes and you cry.
Oh my God.
People have to stay away, it's a real zoo in here. So.
What a fabulous guilty pleasure. I love that. Have you seen the podcast called Hot Ones?
No, wait, I write that down.
Hot Ones. It's hot wings and hot questions.
Oh my God.
And he interviews very prominent people, and he feeds them a range of hot sauces.
Oh my God.
Turned them into manufacturing, and he asks questions, and he hears them eating accelerated levels of hot. And it's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. And honest to God, you will wet yourself laughing, right? Because he asks good questions, but people are like, and at one point he just looks at this person and he's like, one of the guests has been very nice all the way through, and all of a sudden he just looks at him and he goes, fuck you. Just like, because he put it in his mouth, like, he's like, no, Kevin Hart was on there. Oh my God, I was crying laughing.
Oh, I have to watch it. Yeah,
that will feed your guilty pleasure enormously.
Oh my God.
And brilliant. Final question for you. This is a very deep, very powerful conversation. Again, I think we probably have to come back and do part 2 of this because there's so much more to dive into. But let's just leave our viewers, our listeners, with a piece of practical advice. What is the thing that you would have our viewers who maybe, we know range from millennials all the way to elder boomers? What would be the one piece of practical advice you'd like to give them so they could take what it is you shared and actually make something practical out of it?
Yeah.
As a Gen Xer,
here's a real practical one. So so a lot of people complain that millennials are needy, and that they're always, they always want something, and why don't they just get their job done, and what's the issue and what's the problem? What I recommend, and this is kind of in the book, is there's a 3-question, once a week, 5 minutes, 3 questions, right, to the millennial that works for you. First question is, what'd you do last week? And they tell you what they did. Second question is, what are you gonna do this week? And they tell you what their plan is. Third question is, how can I help you? That's it. 5 minutes. Millennials do not like long feedback sessions, but they like frequent feedback. So keep it short, keep it simple, and be there for them, and understand who they are as people, frankly, just like you would anybody, right? That's
anybody you actually gave a shit about, you'd actually bother.
Right. It helps if you give a shit about them. I guess that's my advice.
Little proviso there, little asterisk, give a shit.
Perfect.
Well, this has been fantastic. Please, Warren, please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you, about your book, and all your fabulous resources.
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon. It's Second Wave Millennials, Tapping the Potential of America's Youth. And my company is Second Wave Learning, surprisingly enough, secondwavelearning.com. All the information about the company is there. So pay a visit, and we got some cool stuff on there. So
yeah, we'll make sure that is certainly shared in the show notes, and we'll promote it out there as well. Listen, mate, this has been a joy for me. I've had a great time, and we are going to have to schedule round 2.
Yeah, it's fun.
Maybe you're going to write a second book, and maybe
after the crisis, maybe after after the crisis, we'll see how it went.
Maybe you and I will come back and have another conversation after the 2020 elections.
Exactly.
But,
yeah, I think
thank you, sir. This has been a joy, pleasure. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And I hope that you, dear listener, will make sure that you take what you've learned today and put it into practice. Remember, information is worth the whole in a donut. Transformation takes place through application. Go to secondwavelearning.com. Find out more. Grab the book. It is fascinating. I promise you, it's absolutely fascinating. This is a powerful subject matter, and it's something that we can all learn from, whether we are millennials, whether we are Gen Xers, whether we are baby boomers, or even second wave millennials. Really, I highly encourage you to do that. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any of the past episodes inside of our Facebook page. Just go for Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. You'll find it there. And remember, the research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies often face a challenge that is counterintuitive, in that they're spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in the training and development of your talent, only have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to take you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. And remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need www, just matrix like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It's absolutely free to you. To find out more about hiring me, Dov Barron, as your speaker or your strategist for your organization, you can also go to fullmontyleadership.com, just /consulting or speaking. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about your generational bias and how it might be in the way. Pay attention. We're in the crisis period. It is the fourth turning. And what we don't pay attention to, we repeat. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.